Hi, this is Warren Buckleitner. I'm just back from Bologna, Italy, where I gave a talk called Ethics and the Methods of Fred Rogers, because this is an important topic right now, I believe, and a lot of digital media creators, publishers, distributors are struggling with how to present their content and sell their content to children. I decided to make a copy of this before it drifts too far out of my mind. I was in Bologna because I'm the coordinator of the Bologna Ragazzi Digital Award, a special initiative of the Bologna Children's Book Fair and my publication. I'm an editor of Children's Technology Review. I run a center in our public library called MediaTech. I also organize a conference every year called Dust or Magic to help designers learn about topics like this and child development. I teach at the College of New Jersey in the wonderful IMM program, and I'm a senior fellow at the Fred Rogers Center, which is in the context that I'm giving this talk. Most importantly, I am a grandfather, and if you look at that picture there, that's what you get if you type grandfather into Google. I don't really look like that, but this is my new grandson, Lyndon, to whom I'd like to dedicate this presentation. But some important disclaimers now. I don't formally represent Fred Rogers. Nobody does, either the company or the center. I am a senior fellow. The way I interpret that is that I follow child development theory just as Fred did. We come up with a lot of similar conclusions. I think he's incredibly important right now. I teach a class at TCNJ on the methods of Fred Rogers. This talk really came out of that. So in 25 minutes or so, I talked about who was Fred, why is he important today, and what might he say if he were to walk into the Bologna Children's Book Fair. And I showed a clip, which I won't do here, from the movie. And I highly encourage everybody to watch this documentary because it covers so well what Fred was about. One of the things you get out of the documentary is that he went into television because he hated it so, and he thought that television as a medium was underestimating children, and said children deserve more than just silly entertainment and pies in the face, that this medium could be used to reach many children, and it's a great delivery mechanism for child development or developmentally appropriate practice.
A television program for children made its unauspicious debut on station WQED in Pittsburgh. Its host, Fred Rogers.
Mr. Rogers?
Yeah.
I want to tell you something.
What would you like to do?
I like you.
I like you, my dear.
You can watch that trailer on YouTube. There's also a movie starring Tom Hanks coming out this fall. I highly recommend the textbook for our class, which is The Good Neighbor by Max King. Really gives a lot of detail into the methods, how Fred Rogers came to be. This was really important for talking about Fred over in Europe. Most people have never really heard of him. And so I started out by talking about that pies in the face these days are rather nuanced. I just gave two quick examples, in part because people from both Apple and Google were in the audience when I gave this talk, and I wanted to really take the opportunity to let them know what's going on. First, I told the story of what can happen when a curious child has access to a smart connected device. One morning, my wife and I were having breakfast in a local diner, and as in many public places, there are televisions everywhere, and many of those are broadcasting some form of cable news. Now, if you study that image carefully, you'll see the famous victim in orange and assassin in black. And on this particular day, the news program had put in large 4-inch high letters, "Video posted." Now, what the parents didn't realize was that one of the bored children was reading this and, like any of us are curious, decided to go and search online to actually see this gruesome video. Seeing that kind of brutal violence at a young age is something I think Fred would be speaking up about. And I think we need to be aware as adults how powerful this technology is. Now, I'm a reviewer. I'm also sort of an observer of culture. So if you just keep your eyes open, you'll see it. So we need to look out for stuff, including another sort of quote pie in the face is if you just type dress up play into Google, the Google Play App Store, the selections you get are terrible in terms of full of ethnic and gender stereotypes, and it's not good quality stuff that we want our kids to be using. And to me, that it's a tragedy when this powerful technology is used in such mindless and silly ways. Uh, so I wanted to bring up these things because it's a reality. So I wrote about this in a Fred Rogers blog at the Fred Rogers Center. Um, and one of the quotes I came up for that research was from Maurice Sendak, who, in the context of the Bologna Children's Book Fair, is very relevant. He said grown-ups desperately need to feel safe, and they project that onto kids. But what none of us seem to realize is how smart kids are. And Fred, and again, I'm pulling this from that article or that blog post that I did for the center. Link is at the bottom. Um, he would say that we need to limit our own television viewing, be role models, and that when children are scared or anxious, they might become dependent and more clingy, and it's their way of asking for comfort from the important adults in their lives. And as a side note, if you are running a restaurant, you should think about the kind of content that you have on any screen if children are around. These are wonderful lessons that we need to keep with us from Fred Rogers. Children are always watching and learning. They're watching and learning what we do. We need to give them useful tools and that will serve them in their life and help them to use those tools when they become adults so they can be the world's future peacemakers. These are things that I learned from teaching this class. This is a blog post from Matilda Zhang, who is in this photograph from our class trip to Latrobe, Pennsylvania. Seeing how college undergraduates view Fred Rogers was so useful for me in my thinking of sort of what would Fred Rogers say about using the iPad. Anyone who knows me knows I like to do this thought exercise of what would old theory say about new media, and Fred would have a lot to say right now, and so I'm trying to capture a few of those things. Most importantly, I think Fred would say that we need a new golden rule. We don't need more legislation. We could use more funding and to support ethical publishers. And also, I think Fred would be urging distributors of content, which is no longer network television, but it's Apple and Google and Amazon and the digital pipelines who are actively marketing and promoting content to children to follow a new golden rule. And that is, if you make or sell items in any form for children, whether it's a toy, book, or app, you need to respect the sacred space. What I mean by that is that children are vulnerable, they're precious, and they are members of the future. If you violate the trust by letting a sales agenda or letting ethnic stereotypes or uh, gender stereotypes or just content that is not good, um, you are violating the rule of the what I think is the new golden rule, and that is that you should do unto other people's children as you would have them do unto your own. I think that higher standard is what can carry us through all of the debate. We don't need legislation. We need adults who care to make quality products for children, and we need app stores that will help those adults make a living doing that. Now, in his conversations with child development experts, Fred had recorded these 6 ingredients for a media project. And I'd like to zoom in on just 4 of those, which I talked about at Bologna because there were a lot of digital publishers in the audience. The first is the concept of stillness. And this dandelion seed puff is a perfect example of a medium that will wait for you to engage, to initiate, and then amplifies your feelings of control and makes you feel powerful. And I think that's how we want to use digital media. And I am greatly inspired by pioneers in this space like uh, Catherine Mullen. Um, she worked with Jim Henson. She was the first female puppeteer that worked on The Muppet Show. And she talked about the concept of stillness and how the genius of a true puppeteer is uh, not when the puppet's moving, but when it's not moving. That's where the real magic happens. And as part of my class, we were able to find a lot of examples of great digital design, both in game consoles and in apps, such as Animal Crossing, where you can go fishing and you don't need to do anything. Virtual worlds like that, and I think Nintendo is particularly good at making uh, experiences that Fred Rogers would appreciate today. So some notes from the readings on this concept of silence and stillness. A single candle is enhanced by a dark room. It's hard to do this, to respect the white space when making products. I gave an example in the class of the one caterpillar, 2 designers, and um, Emmett O'Neill over at Story Toys really understands this concept of stillness by starting with a single egg that on a screen, you tap on it, it cracks, and a caterpillar appears. And from then in, your finger drives everything, versus a whole bunch of efforts of apps that I'd reviewed previous to that where it just pushed more Eric Carle on the screen because the designers thought those graphics are good, so you just fill the screen with them. Digital design is one in which digital design is one in which stillness and turn taking is very important. Next up is wonder, and there's an app called Human Body that from Tiny Bop that helps you understand how our heart works. And I think Fred built in authentic content into all of his shows because he wanted children to know how things work, and he told the truth. He would like Toca Boca's Toca Life Hospital because you can play with real machines, gives children the tools to verbalize things that they might be afraid of, and actually adults might be afraid of, anyone who's had an MRI. Another item that Fred would want us to think about is relationships. The picture I'm showing here is Super Smash Brothers, and it's a scene from our public library, and you can see multiple age groups and multiple language groups all gathered around a fun, active game of Super Smash Brothers. And we create this setting on purpose. It's social engineering because we put out 6 controllers, we put out a big couch, and we build a place where long-lasting friends can be made. From the Max King book, there's a nice chapter on Fred's thinking about language. And so I put this slide in about Fredish, how Fred is an early childhood practitioner, really thought carefully about language and how language can help a child understand things. All of these topics we could go into for a week or so. what I discovered from teaching this class is that it's a great class, and I'm going to try to make my syllabus public as soon as I get over this cold. And so the final one here is trust. The screen capture here is from Toga Hair Salon, where you can put your own picture in and then play with it. Uh, Apps like this are empowering, and um, they what you see is what you get. They don't try to manipulate, sell, or um, they don't. They really do respect that sacred space, and I really admire publishers like Tokaboka for being a pioneer in the ethical media space and not compromising by putting in-app purchases in bad places, or um, promoting their brand unnecessarily. I left the talk with a slide on how to be more like Fred Rogers. Fred famously met with some of the best child development experts at the time, including Eric Erickson and Dr. Margaret McFarland. He used to vet every script of the show with Margaret, and they would sit for hours. Many of the tapes of their time together was has been transcribed. It's very useful. So Fred sought out the best people and used them as his teachers, and that really was his secret sauce. Fred also watched people who were good with television, like Gabby Hayes, who told him to focus on one child or one little buckaroo. And if you start thinking that way, again, treating every child that might use your product as if they were your own, and it helps you zoom in on the important stuff. Fred was an adamant collector of wisdom. He was a lifelong student. He started a quote collection early on, so that's one thing that I urged my students to do, is to get a blank notebook and just start making and building knowledge based on ethical thinking for children's media. There's also some wonderful interviews with people like David Newell, who was Mr. McFeely, the delivery man who worked with Fred his entire career. And I asked David what Fred would say about the iPad, and his answer is phenomenal. So have a look at that and um, start looking at the media that children look at, like YouTube, and find examples of things that are good. YouTube is both good and evil, and it's important that we all understand how to uh, direct children to the good stuff. My students help me understand that there's some terrific stuff, including all the episodes of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Artists like Bob Ross are there, and so on. Getting back to these 6 ingredients, one thing Fred did is he did a lot of homework. When we were at the center in Latrobe, we saw some storyboards and actual handwritten notes that Fred made. He sketched on his ideas on, in this case, on an air sickness bag. He did a lot of research. This is before the internet, of course, but that came through in his shows. And then make a draft. Then move before you move it to the teleprompter. Do the show, and then another thing Fred did was he read feedback, and he was an iterative designer. So every show learned from mistakes from the last show, and his television isn't. We all know it wasn't really flashy, but it got better over time. That's the reason he had such a huge following. In Max King's book, there's this quote: Fred's 3 ways to ultimate success, and that is to be kind, to be kind, and to be kind. I hope this just gave you a taste of what's in this class and what I said to the audience over in Bologna, Italy. I'm Warren Buckleitner. Thanks for watching.